Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, a place to find connection and a sense of belonging, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we talk about sensitivity and the richness that it adds, the strengths we have because of our sensitivity, and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there, to the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here today. Today I'm talking with Maureen Healy, and this was an amazing conversation. Some of the things that we talk about is how do you develop an emotionally healthy child? We talk about the emotional brain and helping children use what she calls the dirt of daily challenges, and also not using the word good or bad and not judging emotions, but just allowing all feelings to be feelings. She talks about the 3 steps for emotional health for children. We talk about discipline in the highly sensitive child and how we don't use the word punishment, but we really work on connecting with our kids. She talks about the benefits of using praise, reward, incentives, and really connecting authentically with your children. She also talks about the power of mirror neurons when we talk about discipline and working with our kids. She gives us some tangible tools about when your child is angry, how you can say things like, I see you're angry. What do you need? Hey, I just want to let you know I'm around, and you let your child know that you love them. She also talks about how to deal with kids when they run hot. They're very emotional. And I asked for some feedback, even though my kids are 18 now. One of my kids was pretty emotionally reactive. And initially, I was reactive too. He'd have a tantrum, and I felt entitled to have a tantrum. I did learn how to stay calm after that, but it's an area where I have a lot of regret that I feel like I did not do a great job guiding him. So as long as I had an expert on the podcast, I may as well get some feedback about what I could have done differently. So we talk about that a little bit. Let me tell you a little bit about Maureen. Maureen Healy is the author of The Emotionally Healthy Child and also Growing Happy Kids, which won Nautilus and Reader's Favorite Book Awards in 2014. A popular Psychology Today blogger and sought-after public speaker, Maureen runs a global mentoring program for elementary-aged children and works with parents and their children in her busy private practice. Her expertise in social and emotional learning has taken her all over the world, including working with the Tibetan refugee children at the base of the Himalayas in North India to classrooms in Northern California. If you're interested in following me on Instagram, you can find me at Unapologetically Sensitive. And now, on to the show. Hey, Maureen, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited about having this conversation with you.
I love to chat, so this is all good.
All right, great. So I ask all my guests, do you identify as a highly sensitive person?
I mean, I don't call myself a highly sensitive person. I am a highly sensitive person, but I don't find the labels very helpful, to be honest with you.
Okay. So that's kind of my next question of what do you think of the term highly sensitive person?
I think it's just become too charged by different people. Well, the majority of my practice, I work with parents and children, are highly sensitive children. But sometimes they use it as an excuse, and I don't like that idea. So that's probably one of the reasons why I don't.
Is there another term that you wish were used, or do you just like to avoid it altogether?
I think that everyone is sensitive and some people are more sensitive, and that when we have success, we're both strong and sensitive, or we're both thinking and feeling. So I think that there is a benefit in saying someone's very emotionally sensitive, but I don't think the labeling of them is per se helpful.
Mm-hmm. I do have to say, though, that for me, when I learned about the trait of being a highly sensitive person and read about it, it was so incredibly validating because I think we've all been told we're too sensitive, too picky, too emotional, too whatever. And seeing that it was a research trait, it was innate, it wasn't because there was something wrong with me, it's how I'm wired. I have that same feeling that you do about labels, and it can be so incredibly validating to see that there are lots of people and this is how we're wired.
Right. And I agree. I mean, I wrote a blog for Psychology Today called The Highly Sensitive Child is one of the titles of a specific blog. And people write to me, and about that in my Indigo Kids book, they write to me from all over the world. They're like, oh, now I get it. So I do see that when you find a place and someone describes what you're experiencing, your child is, it does give you relief and it helps you sort of navigate the world. 100%.
Yeah. It's that fine line of labels and using things as a framework to understand. Yeah. Can you tell us, what is an emotionally healthy child?
That's a great question. You know, my last book called The Emotionally Healthy Child. So that's what the book is about, is sort of the ideas and tools and how do you help any child just develop the skill of emotional health. And I would say that it's a very complex, sophisticated topic, just like sensitivity. But the beginning point of being emotionally healthy is identifying your emotions, all of them, whatever they may be, and learning how to express them constructively. So as we know, sensitive kids are more intense, so they feel things really quickly and oftentimes react very fast. So helping them really slow down and take a beat and identify what's going on and then express it constructively is the beginning of emotional health.
I love that. I love that. And then can you talk a little bit about the emotional brain?
Sure. I think a lot's been written over the last decade or even 2 decades, but certainly the last decade about our brains and development. And most of us know that the right side of the brain is more feelings and intuition and sort of the timeless space that are, lots of times kids are in, right? You're saying, let's go to school, and they don't want to be rushed. They're in that imaginative, creative right brain, where the left side of the brain is that logic, that time base, that reason. So we really want to help kids become more whole brain thinkers, using their right and their left brain together. And if we only stay in the right brain, where a lot of that sensitivity sort of lives, we sort of missing a little bit of that balance. Because I consider emotional health the skill of balance. So we're learning how, life throws us off balance just by living, but how do we get back to balance?
That kind of ties into my next question. You talk about helping children use the dirt of daily challenges.
Yes. Well, life just gives us fodder, right? Whether you fail a spelling exam or you feel left out on the playground or you're an adult and you get a flat tire. This is just experiences. None of these experiences are inherently good or bad. It's sort of what we make them to be. So yeah, it's not fun to have a flat tire, but we can learn and persevere and overcome that obstacle. And the same things with children, when they don't do as well as they want to on an exam, you can say, okay, how can we do this differently? Do we need to study differently? Or how can we problem solve? So, whatever happens in life, even the hardest things, we can learn how to use them as sort of stepping stones and fodder. And, life does have very difficult moments.
I think, too, that this is where when we focus on the process as opposed to the outcome. Look, you got an A. That's great. Wow, you really worked hard. You put a lot of time and energy into that. How did that feel for you to spend that time doing that?
For kids, oftentimes it's so easy for even a parent or a teacher, this is good and this is bad.
Right.
And, they say, oh, my best friend's moving away. This is bad. And I'm not saying it feels good. It can be uncomfortable and disappointing and sad, but it's not inherently bad. You make new friends. You can learn how to interact and you can visit each other and go to summer camp together, whatever. So learning how to see experiences just as experiences and then do your best to find the good in them or to make the next best choice be something better.
Yep, exactly. I love it. Thank you.
Sure, it's not an easy one. That's one of the threads throughout my book, The Emotionally Healthy Child, is really how do you use the dirt and the challenges of life to become emotionally healthier? Because if you don't learn how to do this, you really do get stuck in the mud.
Right. And I think so much of what we see in society is about having happiness and having peace and having bliss. And my belief is that when we focus on the process and being in the moment and doing the skill building and leaning into the feelings and using the tools, those things come as a result of that. But that's not what the goal is. If you focus on the process, those things will come. But it's about being fully present to everything that happens in the process.
Yeah, and making good choices, right? If we make the same mistake over and over again, that's problematic. But I would agree with you that if we keep being present and looking, how can I make a good choice, something good for me and good for others, and then you're moving in the right direction for sure.
Right. You talk about 3 simple steps that have the power to change everything with a child's emotional health. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Can I go back to the last subject for a second, though?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So what I was thinking when you said, we're so focused on everyone should be happy, how do we have happiness? And it's true. There's this piece of society where, we don't even want to be authentic with kids sometimes. It's like, oh, everything was fine. This was a good day, when it was a challenging day. So part of becoming emotionally healthy is being honest with your child in age appropriate ways. And that might be, hey, I had a tough day. I need a few minutes. It doesn't mean that we're all sunshine and smiles. And in the book, The Emotionally Healthy Child, they do talk about how wholeness is more important than happiness. And the idea of wholeness is that, yes, we'd like to feel good and be happier, but all of your emotions are valuable and good. You want to experience them all, sad, lonely. You want to be able to experience them all and then constructively move towards the healthier one. Hopefully that's helpful.
No, it's very helpful. And as parents, we really have the opportunity to model emotional health to our kids. And when we're able to say, I'm really mad, I'm really frustrated, I'm really sad, we're modeling to our kids. And I can remember telling my kids, like, I have twin boys, they're 18 now, but saying like, I need to let you guys know that I'm close to losing it. And so this is what I need from you today, because I don't have a lot of bandwidth for stuff. And it's really nice. Now my kids come back and say how helpful that was for them to know kind of where I was at and how much wiggle room there was. And we really have such an opportunity to model to our kids how to express our feelings.
Yeah. And when we're with them and we're present, they know that we can get through it together. Do you know what I mean? It's when you are not being totally authentic, or you're not being, in obviously age appropriate ways, but when you're not being real with them. And it's how much we connect versus disconnect from our children. So we may not understand why that sock is so itchy, or why they're so angry they don't feel like they got as much ice cream as their sister in the bowl. So we may not see it, but we have to be like, okay, I get it. You're frustrated. We have to validate them and help them through it. And that's helping us through that moment too, because it's not easy for anyone in that moment of frustration where you're about to boil over.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Are we ready to move on to the 3 simple steps?
I'm totally ready. I just felt like we had to go back. There was more to that piece.
No, and I need you to do that because you have so much information around this. So please, if we need to go back or readdress something, I want you to do that. So thank you.
Sure thing. So yes, in the Emotionally Healthy Child, they do talk about 3 steps. I mean, they're not necessarily, they're easy to say, but obviously in practice, they're much harder. But the idea is, 1, you learn how to stop and catch yourself. That goes for a parent or a child, but we're talking about children. So it goes for helping children become more mindful and aware to stop and sort of catch themselves. They may want to hit the kid on the playground, but how do you sort of take a deep breath and walk away, or, you catch yourself? Then the second one is to calm. So, no great decisions typically have been made in anger. So you want to calm. And then the third one is to make a smart choice, which is a choice that's good for you and good for others. So if that kid pushed the other kid on the playground, it would be good for him because he'd let his anger out, but it would not be good for the other child. So we want to help kids make choices that are good for them and good for others. So that's a key piece of the puzzle.
So can you take an example of a child or a family that you've worked with? Because this is going to be a process, that it's not like you're going to tell a child, this is what you do, and then bam, all of a sudden, everything changes. So can you take us through a real life example of what this looked like with the problem and the process of moving through this to the child getting more mastery over this?
Sure. So I worked with a child in 3rd grade. She's super sensitive. And, in her 3rd grade class, they were doing like a father appreciation week. They were all appreciating their dads. And her dad happened to be in prison and was, this was a sore subject for her. But she wasn't even aware of how uncomfortable she was. She just got angry. She couldn't really do the project that the teacher assigned, and she couldn't find her words, so she threw a chair across the classroom. It didn't hurt anyone, but that was sort of not a smart choice, and I wound up working with her. She wound up coming to my office. I mean, it's just a process of really emotional coaching and saying, hey, what's going on? How can I help you? Did you realize in that moment, maybe you could have taken a deep breath and done something differently? And she didn't really realize because she wasn't really thinking, right? We all make sort of poor choices when we don't think. So when you step back and gain a different perspective and say, oh, you're right, I could have taken a deep breath. What else could you have done? I have something called the Smart Choices Checklist in my book. And that's like helping kids pre-pave a path before you get frustrated and annoyed and irritated and then angry. How do you recognize, what can I do in those moments? Can I go to the bathroom and splash water on my face if I'm at school? Can I talk to my teacher? Can I draw it in my journal? Like, what are the things you can do that will help you express your emotions, but in a skillful way? So through working with her, she sort of identified different things she could have done, and she just got a different perspective on her experience. And there's nothing wrong with getting angry. We all get angry, but it's what you do with the feeling that matters. So just giving her new tools on how to express and have outlets for her big emotions was helpful, because nowadays there's no more calls from the principal and the school. Things are much better there, and she's more confident because she's able to speak up for herself. I find oftentimes kids need some role playing as well, because they just don't have the language to say, hey, I'm uncomfortable, I don't know what to do now, or you know what I mean, I need help.
Right. I think a couple things with highly sensitive kids, that going back to what we were talking about with authenticity with the parents, that I think often when the parents aren't aware that something's going on, or they feel that they don't want to share it with the child, HSCs, highly sensitive kids, are so aware of what's going on. So they pick up that there's something going on in the environment. And if the parents aren't able to own it and name it, the child's going to make it about themselves and think that they did something wrong. So I think it's even more important when you've got kids that are highly sensitive for the parents to do their work too, because the kids are going to pick up on discrepancies and then make up a story, which is always going to be about what the child did wrong, and it may have nothing to do with the child.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what you're saying is similar to the idea of it's called an illusory correlation. So kids will see two data points and just point them together, and they have nothing to do with what's really happening. So I worked with a child who said, she was very young, but she said, why did my grandmother die? What did she do wrong? Obviously she saw everyone was upset, everyone was wearing black, and then her grandma died. So she assumed she did something wrong. But I'm like, well, that's not necessarily how life works. No, she used her time to go back to spirit. I had to explain to her that it wasn't like a video game. Grandma didn't press the wrong button and she died, so kids will put things together and they won't be accurate. So it does help us I always consider having a team of people, like your child's sort of health or wellness team, because sometimes kids don't want to go to their parents. They might talk to their teacher or a coach or a friend, but the more people around them that are supportive and helpful, I think the better.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We have a Facebook group, and some of the parents had some questions. I'm wondering if we can maybe take a look at those. I picked some general questions, so I don't know how it's going to work if you have input, but can we give it a go?
Totally. Well, I wrote that book, The Energetic Keys to Indigo Kids. So I work a lot with sensitive children. So I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay. So our first one is from Amber Lansford, who's from Columbus, Ohio. And she says, how do we get the school to honor and work with a child's sensitive traits?
It's a good question. From my perspective, the school match is one of the most important matches for a child, because it's like work. That's where they spend the majority of their time. And there are schools that inherently are good for sensitive children, that quote unquote get them and support them. And there are other schools that are more traditional, because sensitivity is not a diagnosis. It's a personality characteristic. It's a trait. It's not like they have ADD or ADHD. You know what I mean? They have a certain type of personality. They are quiet or calm or more reserved. They're more creative oftentimes. It takes a special teacher, classroom, and school to recognize the giftedness that comes oftentimes with sensitivity and to help a child thrive. So it's really, it has to do with the school. I mean, if I was working with a very logical school, left brain school, I would present to them all the science around sensitivity, meaning there's been research, and the MRIs show, the brain scans show, that someone who is very sensitive has a different nervous system, that it's not made up, that it's actually a different nervous system. They feel things more deeply and they react more quickly. So I would share with them the real data, and perhaps they would take it into consideration.
Okay, that sounds good. It's a hard question, and I think it really depends on the school. Yeah. Amber also wanted to know, how do you find friends? If you're a highly sensitive child, or you're the parent of a highly sensitive child, how do we go about finding friends that are good fits for our kids? Or how do the kids go about finding friends?
I mean, I'm always a big believer that anyone, but particularly someone who's sensitive, you pursue things that are of interest to you. And someone who's interested in sensitive things, will find other sensitive kids, whether it's a painting class, a dance class, a theater class. When I was younger, I went to USDAN, a Center for Creative Arts, in the summer. So it was just full of sensitive kids. It was just I didn't know I was going to become an author when I grew up, but when I was really young in elementary school, I went to summer camp and I did painting and I did writing. I did a class on writing your own book. I just found those people through looking for creative outlets that I liked, and that there was just a natural sort of magnetic law of attraction working.
I would imagine too that it's also an opportunity to talk with your kids about what are the qualities that you like in your friends, so that you start raising that emotional intelligence and the awareness around what is it that you like to have in your friends, so that once you name it, they start recognizing it in other kids.
Yeah, I would think of it like placing an order for the universe. Like if you see and feel something, you'll experience it. So if you see like, oh, I want a friend who's honest. I want a friend who's funny. I want a friend, you know what I mean? I want a friend who's quiet, who some kids just don't like going into those big loud noises. And I want someone who's going to enjoy just walking on the beach with me, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I think it's really an opportunity for parents to put language to what they observe with their kids to help raise the awareness in their kids. I noticed that you like so-and-so. What is it that you like about so-and-so? Oh, so this is a trait that you like. Because kids are just so in the process that they're not aware of what they're doing or the qualities that their friends have. So it really is an opportunity for the adults in that child's life to help them identify the process or the qualities that they have in friends.
I agree.
Is there an and?
No, I was just listening. I think you're right. I think, we had to make teaching our kids interesting and fun. One of the complaints I get from kids is it's like, oh, I'm getting to talk from my mom again. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think we have to not go at a lot of things directly and go at them sideways and do it in more engaging ways, whether it's watching Gordimer Gibbons on TV, a great TV show for like 9 to 12-year-olds where it's fun, but kids don't even realize they're learning. And every one of those sitcom episodes has a lesson for children. So they're learning how to be honest, but you're not like beating them over the head. You're saying, oh, look at that. That worked out when they were, you know what I mean? So I think that's true. We don't want to be too preachy.
Yeah, I guess when I think about it, I think about being reflective. And I just did this with my college-age son who had a paper due at midnight and called me at 7 and he hadn't started. And so says no mother ever to their child, I want you to write a terrible paper. Like the goal is by midnight, I want you to write a 5-page terrible paper just to get him started. But we talked about the process. And when he was done and he felt so pleased, it's like, yeah, you stuck with this and look at how good you felt when it was over. So it didn't, I don't know, to me, that's not preachy. Maybe that feels preachy to you, but that's just my orientation.
No, that doesn't sound preachy at all. But I'm just coming back from another perspective, working typically with kids. That's what I get sometimes. So it's just something to be aware of, not in your example, but in general, how we go about it matters as much as what we're saying.
Yeah. So I got another question from Kevin. I think this is how you say your last name, Thebo, from Charlottetown, Prince Edward's Island in Canada. And he's got 2 questions. How do you discipline a highly sensitive child?
Well, I love PEI. That's a beautiful place where he lives.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the few places that looks just like Ireland, actually. But anyway, they have a big potato crop. I have my neighbors bringing potatoes from there all the time, which is funny. Discipline is an interesting word. I would say that it's a very traditional word. So from my perspective, it's more like you do better with children, specifically sensitive children, if you partner with them versus punish them. But of course, there are times when it's just like, hey, this is the bedtime, or hey, there are things that are negotiable, things that aren't negotiable. Hey, you need to wear underwear today. You need to put your raincoat on. There are things that you just need to do. But I'm a big fan of partnering with children and connecting with them and saying, hey, these are the rules of the household. This is what I expect from you. This is what I expect from me. If, any of us curses, there's a curse jar. Really working with them in age-appropriate ways. And of course, there's times where no is just no. I'm a big believer in incentivizing kids and saying, like, if we really need something to happen, I have no problem with praising them and rewarding them and encouraging them. Not that you want to reward them for everything, but I think that since a child is so sensitive, we don't want to damage that child's self-esteem and confidence. So we want to connect with them in an authentic way when things are going off the rails and say, hey, this is not behavior that's going to work for me in this household. You know what I mean? You need to work with me on this, or you can take away screen time, or you can do things that are more course correcting. But I guess I don't like the word discipline. What are your thoughts?
No, I agree with you. And my kids were highly spirited, and parenting was really a challenge. And I can see in certain ways where I lacked some skills for them, but I really found that working with them, and I used collaborative problem solving with them, I kind of found it intuitively, but it seemed to be pretty effective. And that matches, I have a pretty strong attachment style with my parenting. And so it really works better to work with them and to share with them and have them be part of the process. And often the truth be told, I couldn't figure out what the consequence would be. I'd say, like, what do you think the consequence would be? And sometimes they came up with really good consequences. So I think that we can partner with our kids effectively and still maintain a parental role.
Right. And I think oftentimes if we can do that beforehand, that's even helpful, meaning, we set some rules. Hey, this is what's expected of you. And if this doesn't happen, what do you think would be a good consequence? So when they do go off the rails, they've already agreed to the consequence. They know the rules. So that's helpful.
It took me a long time to get the parenting down, but finally in high school, I was able to say, if I'd come in to wake them up, like, hey, if I have to come in here again, this is what the consequence is going to be. When I was really clear, then it made it really clear. And then they could decide, is it worth it to go back to bed and lose whatever it was that they were going to lose? It took me out of that loop of feeling like I was the nag and having to be responsible for coming in over and over again. So yeah, when we've got that clarity, it really can make parenting a little bit easier.
Absolutely.
So Kevin's other question was, in his family, one of them is highly sensitive and the other parent isn't, and it kind of creates a good cop, bad cop. So he was sort of curious about, how do you deal with that when you've got at least one highly sensitive child and then one of the parents is highly sensitive? So the parents are going to have a different approach to parenting and disciplining, for lack of a better word right now.
It's a really good question, because that's the most common scenario that I see, is that one of the parents is very sensitive and one of them is like, I have no idea what you're talking about. From my perspective, from the big picture, I think that every child is perfectly matched with their parents, and couples are matched, for the highest spiritual growth. So that doesn't mean it's easy. Sometimes you could be two sensitive people and you're not the sensitive one in the house. By being able to be open and present and mindful and want to learn and want to understand their perspective, that would be helpful. But when we're talking specifically about discipline, oftentimes parents, they struggle with, I want to parent one way and the other one wants to parent the other way, or partners. And I guess what I would suggest is to get the messaging and to get on the same page first, separate from being in the presence of your child, so that you can both do it differently. You're different personalities, but on the big topics, you need to stand on the same ground. You know what I mean? So I think that, sure, we know that when dad's there and mom's out for the night, maybe he's a little bit more lax with the television. There's certain things that just are because of different people's personalities. But on the big topics, I believe we need to be on the same page just for the health of the child.
Sure. My husband and I often had to do this where it's like, Dad and I need to go talk about this and then we'll get back to you, because my husband and I had very different parenting styles, and he came from a very traditional family and I have a very different orientation. So we often would just need to say, like, we need to go talk about this. We'll get back to you.
And what I love about that is you're not just telling them, you're showing them, like, hey, you have a healthy marriage. You put effort into it. We got to work this out and we'll come back. And, this isn't just, you're not parenting, sort of off the cuff constantly. You're really trying to make the best choices as a team.
Right. So let me ask you this. I know we talked about this, and to be perfectly transparent, it's too late now, but one of my kids has a lot of impulse control issues. And so he would get really explosive. He's very quick to anger and then, is ready to apologize and forgive. And then the rest of us like, well, we just got hit by a train. We're not quite there yet. And I really feel like I failed him in knowing how to manage, because he was so incredibly reactive and would get angry so quickly. And I just didn't know what to do. And I'll be perfectly honest that early on, like, he'd have a tantrum and I'd have a tantrum because I wasn't allowed to have tantrums. That really didn't work out so well. And it gave us a chance to do repair work, where I could go and say, like, I lost it and I'm really sorry that didn't work so well. I'm not advocating that we lose our cool with our kids, but when we do, I think the repair work is really important. I'm really curious because I don't know that I would know how to do it differently if I had to.
So nowadays, we know that impulse control is, like we talked about, the right brain being very creative and imaginative and feelings, and the left brain being more logical. A child who's very impulsive means there's an imbalance. There's more right brain, not left brain as much. So you would do more brain balancing type work. So there's lots of different modalities and strategies to work with a child to balance their brain so that they can get their impulse control issues in check, because it's part of child development. It's part of developing, is having that impulsivity and that reactivity, but learning new ways to handle it and do it differently. That's why OT is very helpful for some sensitive children.
Yeah, both of my kids had OT and PT. One had speech therapy, but I guess I'm thinking like, if I were to go back in time and he just gets explosive, he goes off the rails and he's kind of what I call his reptile brain. He's in his T-Rex brain where there's no logic and no chance to really do calming in the moment. What do you tell a parent?
Well, I mean, there's something very important called mirror neurons. The science of mirror neurons is that when you're in the presence of someone who knows something, it's infinitely easier for you to learn it. So what I would recommend is we have to do our own work as parents and teachers and adults and professionals. How do you become calm? So when you're calm, your child can become calmer. But when we get angry, they're angry, we get angry, they take our anger, then they send it back to us even bigger. And it's just sort of this out of control fire. So I think working on how we keep ourselves in check is helpful. And also in the moment, you're in the moment. The work is before the big emotion comes, so preventative, or it's afterwards, looping back with the child and saying, could we have done that differently? But in the moment, they're emotionally hijacked and their right brain is flooded with emotions and logic can't even come online. So the work isn't in the moment, it's before or after. And I think it really is about ourselves. When I work with kids, it's always, an aha when I meet their parents. I'm like, I get it. Just because, sure, the acorn can fall far from the tree, but it doesn't always. You know what I mean? And from a child 0 to 8, they're so connected to the parent that they're sort of co-regulating with the parent. They're really relying on mom and dad or dad and dad or whatever the family dynamic is to learn how to manage their emotions. And if they don't learn how to self-soothe or keep things in check or learn how to have some self-discipline, then things are more difficult.
So I'm just curious if you're okay with me going here, because I really want to get this right. So after a while, I really did learn to stay calm, and it's kind of cool. I had both of my kids on the podcast, and we talked about it. My son doesn't remember me losing it with him, so at some point I turned it around, and I figured, we'll keep your story. Like, if you don't remember me losing it, I'm good with that. And I can still remember him getting really triggered, and I think because his emotions were running so high, his brain had a need to make up a story about why he was upset, and he would just kind of rant endlessly while he was in this really aroused state. And I would stay calm, but I really didn't know what to do with him. And I guess this is where you try and get calming activities. That's a question.
If someone's in an emotionally volatile state, I would just be with them. As long as they're not going to hurt themselves or hurt others, I would just let them know that I'm here if you need me. And then I would really guide them to some sort of constructive outlet. Do you need to hit a punching bag? Do you need to jog? Do you need to jump on the trampoline? What do you need right now to get this out of you in a constructive way? Because if it's in you and you're angry and you're furious, maybe it's like those gym balls that they have. I have them at my house. They're 10, 20-pound balls, you lift them up and you throw them on the ground. And just doing that makes you feel better. There just needs to be some sort of thing that works for the child in that moment, that they can get it out and they don't hurt anyone. Maybe they punch the pillow, maybe they scream. It gets harder when they become teens and they can start driving and making really poor choices. So that's why I think, early childhood is so important.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I talk about emotions. That's Gracie in the background. There's a dog outside. She's getting excited. So that's Gracie, everybody. When we think about emotions as energy, what you're saying totally makes sense, that you find a way to channel that energy so that the emotion runs through, so then you can get to the calming and the decision making. That makes total sense to me.
Yeah, and sometimes kids just need to be left alone, and that's okay too, as long as they're not going to make any bad choices. If they just need to sit in their room and breathe it out or close their eyes, or, it's almost like the way I think about it is what tools can I give them so that they can use for their lifetime? if we're talking about emotional health, they get off balance. How do they reset themselves? And of course, sensitive kids are more intense oftentimes. They have bigger emotions. It's fast moving. They're very reactive. They start that way. We can't bring logic into the equation until they learn how to slow down and get their emotions out so that we can talk to them logically at another point.
Right. And the error that I know that I made was I would often send him to his room to calm down, but it wasn't done out of love. It was done out of, I can't deal with you. I don't like how you're behaving. You need to go to your room. And so I think that the message that I sent him was, your feelings aren't okay. And if you're having these kinds of feelings, you're not okay and you need to go somewhere else. Where obviously, knowing what I know now, I would do it very differently. But I think it's really important in fact, maybe you can address it of how would you encourage a parent to communicate with their child if the child needs some space, but to really convey to the child, like, you're okay, your feelings are okay, but I want to create a space for you to have those feelings without giving them the message that their feelings aren't okay and you have to go somewhere when you have these undesirable feelings.
Yeah, I mean, like you said before, it's always modeling. So when they see us frustrated, but we work through something, that's a good experience for them to witness. But when they're having, they're really angry and they're just so angry, I would say, I see you're angry and you're upset. What do you need right now? And they might say, go away. Or I'm like, all right, I will leave you alone. If you need me, I'm in the house. I suggest you do something constructive, like hit the punching bag or have a few things set up that if your child runs hot with anger, that there are a few things that they can do somewhere not far away that are helpful. And I would recommend them, but I'd say, hey, and I'm around. I think one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle is they just need to know you love them, you're there for them, and it's okay to be angry. Just let it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is that fine line. I mean, for me, I was sent to my room if I was going to cry. So for me, I learned crying wasn't okay because it overwhelmed my mom. So that created a real burden for me. And I did the best job I could with my kids. And I certainly had my own shortcomings where I can see that coming up. But we really do want to convey to our kids that all of their feelings are okay, that we love them no matter what, and that maybe we're having limitations around being around their feelings. But I think it's so easy to give kids that message that what they're feeling is not acceptable because as adults, we don't even know what to do with it, or we feel overwhelmed, or we can't manage it. And then the kids learn that their feelings aren't okay, and feelings are just feelings.
Right. And in the book, The Emotionally Healthy Child, which I wrote, there's a chapter about the 7 core ideas children need to know about their feelings. So they're the things children need to know. So that would be helpful to tie into this discussion, meaning, if parents want to dive deeper into what are the messages I should be sending them. So that's what I do in the book, The Emotionally Healthy Child, just give the ideas and strategies because, even if you don't use all the strategies letter by letter, we all need a starting point. Where do I begin?
Sure. Is that something you'd be comfortable sharing here, or do you want people to get your book so that they can read that themselves?
I'll give you a concept. And I'll talk about younger children, younger kids, and it could be older kids, but I work a lot with younger children. When I work with a child who runs hot with anger, I might say after a situation's happened, I said, hey, so how big did that emotion feel? And they would be like, oh, it was gigantic. I said, well, was it bigger than you or were you bigger than the feeling? They were like, oh, the feeling was much bigger than me. And I always say, that's not true. You're actually bigger than the feeling. So you have more power in you and that you can direct this emotion or this feeling in any direction you choose. So it's like an emotional aha when a child realizes, oh, I'm bigger than my feeling. There are certain ideas that they need to learn so that they can begin to get control over their emotions. And if they don't have those ideas or that knowledge, it's very difficult to become emotionally intelligent if you don't know how emotions work. That's sort of how I would explain it.
I love that. It's a beautiful example. I don't want to go back and reparent again, but I kind of wish I could.
Thank you. That's the thing that I think is so great. Like, what we did 20 years ago is so different than what people are doing today. And that's sort of, I don't know, optimistic to me.
Sure. And I've gone back to my kids as I'm learning things, and I'll go back and go, hey, I'm realizing like I was lacking some skills, and this is how I see it showing up for you. These are some options at this point if this is something that you think is a problem for you and we can get help, because like I just didn't have the tools or the skills to give it to you. I mean, that's the best that I can do at this point because, we do the best that we can given the skill set that we have.
Absolutely. And the idea of constantly learning is a great thing to communicate with your children. We're not static creatures, we're dynamic, we're always evolving. I mean, I always think about my grandparents who had 12 children. My grandmother was a different mom to the first child than she was to the 12th. She just learned more. It's fascinating.
Well, and I think the power of naming it with our kids, that it shows them that we're imperfect, we make mistakes. They can identify where maybe some of the shortcomings are in their life. And we also are saying it's okay to come back and talk to me about this. I think having that open communication is so important.
Yeah, and I think a big piece of the puzzle that we're not really talking about, but we're kind of talking about is really forgiveness. Whether it's forgiving ourselves as parents when we make missteps and we repair the relationship, or our children that we forgive them, or that they know how to forgive, because that's such a critical piece of becoming emotionally healthy, is being able to just let go of things at some point. And not saying that we condone certain things from other kids, whether they were bullies or whatever, but being able to really say, okay, I'm not going to put my energy there. It's not worth that.
Right. Maureen, what's another area that I haven't touched on that you think is really important to talk about?
That's a great question. I would just say, I guess, the idea of discomfort. In the book, The Emotionally Healthy Child, they talk about in order to become emotionally healthier, we have to learn how to embrace discomfort. And as sensitive people, we have like a very small window where we're comfortable, and most of it, a lot of the world is uncomfortable. I think one key to success in becoming emotionally healthier, and I think another key for sensitive people in general, is really how do we widen that window of comfort. If we don't like to be in crowds, that's okay. We can navigate and decide not to do things unless it's such an amazing venue. We decide, okay, I'll be a little uncomfortable, but it still will be okay. But the idea that we can embrace discomfort and that we're bigger than any, whether it's uncomfortable feelings or uncomfortable experiences, beginning to get that sort of confidence and that awareness that what's inside of you is greater than anything in the outside world. So my first book, Growing Happy Kids, I talk a lot about confidence and what we call inner confidence, which is more resilience and grit. But the idea is that we have to be okay with discomfort, if that makes any sense.
It totally makes sense. And the reality is, I think that highly sensitive people have a much greater capacity to experience discomfort because we are feeling things on such a deep level. But it's the piece that you're talking about is turning that around into an empowerment where I think that even though we get messaging like, you're so sensitive and you can't handle things and you're weak and you're fragile, the reality is our capacity to feel is so incredibly deep. And when we get mastery over that, we're powerhouses. And I think that we have some gifts that non-sensitives don't have when we're able to turn that around and master it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that anyone who's been super successful at business is sensitive. They have good instincts, I guess I would say. So when we learn how to like harness that force for good, when we learn how to navigate through some discomforts, but recognize who we really are is bigger than any of those experiences, I think that that's super helpful. And also, I think you do need to find your people or your tribe, the people that unconditionally love and support you, whether that's your family or your community or wherever and that's the same thing with children. That's what we were talking about. How do you find friends? You really need those peers to say, you got this.
Absolutely. And I think that the challenge is that when we as adults did not get those positive messages as kids, we often create relationships with people that continue to reinforce the negative messages about how we show up in the world. And we believe that this is all there is. And so we end up feeling not okay about our sensitivities. But once we look at our sensitivities and embrace them, and then can kind of, for lack of a better word, level up in our relationships, so that what you're saying is we surround ourselves with people that embrace who we are and we really get that mirrored back to us, that's when the magic happens. And that's when we can also do that for our kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. That's exactly right. And then, if you are a sensitive child and you're in a stinky situation, I work with a bunch of kids and we talk about how to find the right groups of people, because you're right. When you do get that mirrored back to you, that all is well, that you're perfect, whole, and complete as you are, you start to have a different self-talk. And that's really what it's about. We want our kids to be saying to themselves, I got this, I'm feeling good. Or even if they had a problem or a challenge, this stinks, but you know what, I can try again. Or, try and develop some sense of helpful emotions like appreciation and this sort of moving in a healthier direction.
Yeah, absolutely. How would you suggest if someone is listening and they go like, I think I need to learn how to embrace discomfort a little bit more. What would you suggest they do?
It's a very good question. I did write about it in my book, The Emotionally Healthy Child, but I guess it's really it's a step-by-step process, right? You become a little more comfortable. It's like widening your comfort zone little by little by little. And soon you realize, oh my God, I got this. I still may not want to go food shopping as an adult, like, when it's the time where everyone's going, because that's too much. But, if I need to, I can. I can navigate that experience. I think that we're not really talking about energy too much, but, I think as a sensitive person, you do have to learn how to protect and restore your own energy field, and you have to learn how to do that when you're in a crowd of lots of people and when you're home alone. And I think that as you learn how to work with your energy, you can keep widening your window of discomfort in easier and easier ways, because you recognize that, how things work for you.
Mm-hmm. I love using curiosity too, to just start getting really curious about what things start to come up and to gather information. Because I think for me, when I think about embracing discomfort, I also think about being able to sit with emotional discomfort and what is it that comes up and where is it showing up in my body and what am I thinking? What do I tell myself when this comes up? Does it feel dangerous?
Yeah, and I guess that's really why I brought it up, was the emotional discomfort, because if you want to become healthier and ultimately happier, you have to be able to deal with challenging emotions, whether it's anger, sadness, loneliness, disappointment, jealousy. I mean, you have to be able to be with them. You can't run away from them or hide them or suppress them. You know what I mean? You have to be able to be with them and learn how to go through them, experience them, and then get to the other side. And if you don't like discomfort, like a lot of kids react so badly because they feel discomfort and they're like, they don't realize they're bigger than their discomfort. So that discomfort is really a key piece of the puzzle in becoming emotionally healthier.
Right. It's really interesting. My sons were home for spring break this week and I went kayaking with one of my sons and he was ramming into me with his kayak. We were splashing each other. I'll tell you, before I started this podcast, if he had even touched my kayak, I would have freaked out because I tend to be very fearful, very anxious. Don't mess with me. I either go into a fearful response or an angry response, but the two are very strongly connected. And we were talking about this. He's like, you've really changed. And what I know is I have really been working on allowing myself to feel everything, the anger, the frustration, the sadness, the judgment, the disappointment. And it's allowed me to really relax and experience so much more joy. And I think that when we create room to feel all the feelings, and if we only let ourselves feel them a little bit, then we have a little capacity for the joy as well. And when we deepen that ability and the capacity to feel uncomfortable things, to the depth that we do that, we also create space for joy and happiness and bliss. And when we look at emotions as energy just moving through us, it really can create a shift. And then what you're saying, that we're bigger than the emotions, that they're not going to overrun us. It's incredibly powerful and healing.
Right. And I mean, I think a key piece of the puzzle is that we don't want to label the emotions. There aren't X emotions that are good or Y emotions that are bad. Emotions are just emotions.
Right.
So when you're feeling jealousy, it's just jealousy. Or you're feeling anger, it's just anger. It's going to come and it's going to go. Like, I agree with everything that you said, that, when you feel the depths of negative emotions, you can feel the heights of positive emotions. And we obviously want to stay sort of in that happy medium, but that doesn't mean we don't feel sad when we lose a dog or you're supposed to feel all of your emotions. That's why they're given to you as that guidance system.
Yeah. Yeah. Maureen, we're needing to wrap up a little bit. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you think is really important that you want to share?
Nothing I can think of.
I have a question that I ask all of my guests. What do you do for play?
I think every single day is a little bit of play, to be honest with you.
Yeah?
Well, I mean, I work with children. I mean, so I play games but for me, for play, I mean, gosh, I'm a playful person. So I tend to really enjoy, whether it's a morning walk on the beach or whether it's, laughing with friends. I'm really a silly kind of person. I do like jokes. I do like, I'm just a playful person.
Okay. All right, great. Can you tell us about what you're working on? Tell us about your books, where we can find you. I have everything that you're going to tell us in the show notes. So if you go to unapologeticallysensitive.com, everything that Maureen is going to tell you is written down. So you know that you got it.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I would say my last book, The Emotionally Healthy Child, that one is the most recent book and is sort of a great one with ideas and strategies. And then I would say before that, I wrote about indigo kids, and we didn't really talk about those children, but the ones who are highly sensitive and very strong-willed. So if you have someone who's sort of, not only sensitive, but has a deep, strong-willed nature, that might be of interest. And I can be found at growinghappykids.com and highlysensitivekids.com.
Excellent. And you have one other book, don't you? You have 3 books.
Yeah, Growing Happy Kids was about how to build inner confidence, and that sort of what we sort of touched on, that awareness that what's inside of you is greater than whatever's in the outside world. It gives sort of 5 building blocks for that confidence.
Okay. And you do work with parents and kids?
I do.
Okay. All right. Maureen, is there anything else before we go?
No, I really appreciate you having me, and it's a wonderful podcast, so I'm delighted to participate.
Oh, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Have a blessed day.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye. Hey again. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I thought Maureen had some wonderful things to share. I really enjoyed her expertise. If you're enjoying the podcast, please share it with other people. If you can rate and review. If you listen to this podcast on an Apple phone, if you just scroll down in the app, you can rate it, you can write a review and submit it. It really helps people to find the episodes. If you don't know how to do that or you're not using an Apple phone, you can go to unapologeticallysensitive.com and look up the show notes for almost all of the episodes, and there are links and instructions on how to rate and review the podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I really do appreciate each and every one of you. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.